Skateboarding is just such a notch up from a lot of sports as far as how tough you have to be to get that good. I think that in a lot of ways it gives you strength for the rest of your life.
In order to achieve greatness, you have to go through a lot of pain. You definitely have setbacks, but in order to achieve that success, you have to push through. You're going to have to battle injury.
I don't do that crazy stuff. But Danny is a good friend of mine, and I'd like to share some of the things I learned from not only him, but from the rest of my community, because I think it transcends skateboarding. I'll begin with a few clips of myself. I'll give you a sense of parallax, so you can see both the sort of breadth and depth of what we do. All skateboarders speak a common language of our own devising. And we learn it in the same way that, we all learn basic things and then complex things. We take simple movements and we chunk them together in such a way that we form more complex ones. You do that a million times until it becomes natural, unthinking, and automatic, executive. As you do this, you take in environmental components that aren't always clear and obvious. So the way Danny learns things, for example, is they're floating around up there on the vert, relatively weightless in a sense, going really fast. So when they do the flick and they catch the board, it has to be really gentle, because by the time you catch it, if you push it away at all, it'll go away, and that's no good. With us on the ground, we snap and bring it up as high as we can and bring it up and stomp it. And so what happens is, if you transpose this, we bring very much of a physical dialect. It's just like, it's an accent. So Tony Hawk calls it vertosis because it's a heavy-footedness, it's slow, and you can't take it out of them. Likewise, us, when we go up, we have these kind of, jerky, earthbound, constrained movements. And so what I'm saying is that by doing what we do, we take environmental components, and they integrate in such a way that you can't necessarily extricate them, even if you try. I'm particularly sensitive to this because I started doing something called freestyle. And I'm still trying to shed the accent. It's been like 30 years. So I'd like to tell you another component, and it's certainly less tangible, but just as powerful in its effects. David. These are some of the most creative and driven people I've ever known, and having spent a long time around them, I become more hardened in my conviction every year with the following: that the biggest obstacle to creativity is breaking through the barrier of disbelief. A lot of people have good ideas, but it's an entirely different thing to precipitate that vision into something tangible, especially when no one else is doing it. There's a few ways that you can see it. I mean, all of us, as you can see, we film and we publish this stuff around the world. And then, I don't know, within months, sometimes weeks, so-called friends send us links of some rotten kid in Madagascar doing the trick better than you do. And you look at him, you're thinking, wait, he's not even that good. But he's doing what I do. And trust me on this, I understand that it could be said that he learned how to do it through the video. It's not the case. He learned that it could be done through the video. Once you cross that barrier, it takes different, exceptional people, generally, to be able to go and do what other people don't, sheer from belief, from a vision. Another way we often see this is you take moderately talented guys, and I was a good example of that, and you put them in surroundings of teams, other amazing people, and there's a form of inculcation of the new normal, where suddenly those kids are doing not only things that surprise you from a distance, but would surprise themselves. Little Mitchie, that kid, that wonder kid, he has every gift in the world, and he's as humble as they come. He's surrounded, these ramps aren't everywhere, as you might expect, and he's surrounded by these characters, these animals that do that every day. And so they define to him, hey, this is normal, this is what we do, and they do it. And this kid goes, all right, cool. So he does this crazy stuff, he comes rolling up the ramp, and was that hard? Because it's an inculcation. Again, it's a form of vision that gets baked into you through the process. Now, there's another form of this that it's more of a, well, images, we'll say.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Oh, man.
Oh man, that gave me so much fucking.
You all right?
I'm so.
That's Carlos. I let that last footage roll. You can see that the make, that was at 3 or 4 seconds. For every make of a few seconds, there is hours, days sometimes, of just what you watch. Not as dramatic necessarily, those are highlights, that's why I showed them. But what we do is fall all the time, and we get back up. And that shapes us proportionately. So what Carlos does, when he takes those hits, every fiber in him at a somatic level, his physical being is, whatever you do, don't do that again. He gets up, he's with his head, he's overriding, no, we're going up, why you have it. He runs up, slams again, same thing, up. There's a cognitive override, you are doing this because I don't want to come back. He goes up, he makes an adjustment, locks up, falls again. Mind you, he's going backwards down that thing. And what happens at that stage, those relatively cat-like falls that save him, I mean, he bounces right back up. I guarantee you, he has no idea what he did. If there's anything you pick up by being around these guys, is whatever you do, don't think about it too much. Because you ingrain it so much, but at some point, you have to let go. And I know that myself. For the little things that I do is I never remember anything. It's always that one last thing, and then you just sort of get put on these railroad tracks that pulls you through. Interestingly enough, the one thing you remember that is crystalline is the sounds. Every last bit of the sounds I remember. They just keep echoing. So what is this? It's a kind of somatic awareness that's being built up at this level, at a physical level. Again, they couldn't do that stuff. They tried. Danny floating around upside down the way he is. I went down and watched him skate one day, and he comes up after this crazy fall. His feet were everywhere, and somehow he ends up on his feet. He comes running up, there's dust all over his face, and he's got this crazy look. And he's like, oh, you're not going to get very far with this program unless you're in touch with your instincts. So what does that mean? It means that there's a part of us that we're shaping all the time. While we're learning, there is so much from the environment that's being soaked in and shaping us. Which leads me to the next. This may come as a surprise, but skateboarding can be hard on your body. In my case, we are flesh and bone, we're sophisticated puppets. And so what we do, the flesh, it conforms, just like wearing multi-level clothes in the winter, gyrating motions. The next thing you know, you're kind of bound up. Same thing happens with skating, and it is the essence of stance. All skaters take on what's called a stance. It's not here. It has nothing to do with cognitive software encoding. It is here, physical. So the sort of second part of my career, whatever you call it, is I switched up my kind of skating. And for whatever reasons, the combinations left me in a bad way. And I had so much scar tissue that it was essentially pulling my femur into my hip and grinding 15 times a day on good days. So there was no movement. I go see a good friend of mine, the best heart of gold, and they fly me to the East Coast, and they take all the pictures, and they say, you have scar tissue akin to when people get in front-end collisions, and their femurs smash into their pelvis, and he looked at me with these eyes that said what he wouldn't say. You're done. So he gave me this little tool. He described this one process that in my mind I pictured as a bit of a boat crank. They put you to sleep and they just, and they break it. A little bit violent, not a way to go. So I took this tool, and essentially myofascial release, you poke yourself, and then you can tear the scar tissue little bits at a time. And I was, all right. Mind you, I couldn't walk for more than 50 yards at a time without having to rearrange myself, less than that on cold days. Couldn't run for years, not from here to there. So I went home, and all the things that have formed me, skating, I was thinking, okay, well, how can I make this more? What can I do? So I started taking screwdrivers and taping the top and jamming it in just so I wouldn't break the flesh. I'm thinking, I'm going somewhere. Next thing I know is fire hydrants. They are everywhere, and those little prongs, they're perfect. I can get leverage, and I find all of these different ways. So inevitably, I found the wheel well in my car, and after about 1,500 hours of that, I'm getting to know what's me and what's not me in terms of the scar tissue, and you pull and you pull and pull, and it breaks like dried gum. After another couple of thousand hours, this is years of this. I would take a day off every 2 weeks. One night, it's about 1:30 in the morning up in the valley, cold night, and I'm hanging upside down from my car, and I'm doing what I always do. Right when it's hurting so much, that's when you give it all you can. I'm using my body weight as leverage, grabbing the frame of the car, and there's this thump. I've broken, a dozen bones or so, fingers, toes, ribs, collarbones, they're like pencils. This is like a tree branch. My head hit my hand, and I pull my head off, and there's snot and tears. I pull my body out, and I'm just kind of laying there, and I'm thinking, what have I done? What have I done? What have I done? The doctor warned me that with all the grinding, eventually it would calcify and solidify and weld itself together. And when I got up, I realized, oh my gosh, it's no longer a stick shift, it's a ball and socket. It works. So I kept going. Next thing I knew, I could run, and I could do a lot more than that. Here's some examples. Notice there's a sense of directionality. Look at the back, the right hip connected to the shoulder. There's subtleties. Same thing. This is forward, this is backwards. You're locked. It's the nature of stance. This is when I first started to break it away, only from a couple years ago. There is a sense of stancelessness. There's no longer that sort of confinement. And this opens doors for me that I did not necessarily have access to. So where it takes me, it's what I make of it. All I know is I don't have a cane, and like I say, I can run like the wind. This doesn't make me special. These are other guys from my community. This guy was homeless. Eventually, he takes up kind of skateboarding, and he eventually changes the way, from my point of view, how we all skateboard. He founds one of the biggest companies, then founds another huge company. They're all physical geniuses, all of them overcomers. This guy at the bottom right, intellectual genius as well. This, same story, same basic thing, greatest guys. But they've done things far outside of skateboarding too. All overcomers, huge things. This guy, one of them Doc tells him that he's got so much damage to him that he's done. Instead, he takes that and he changes his way of skateboarding completely. And he just comes out a couple of months ago with the best thing he's ever done because he was faced with that challenge that made him better. This guy to the right in particular is who we're talking about. That's Danny, who we started out with. Danny broke his neck, not skating, surfing, goofing around. And he certainly went through an unorthodox way of handling it. Doctors said he risked paralysis by seeing which doctor was bandied about. Again, unorthodox. He got through it. Next thing you know, he's jumping the Great Wall of China. I think he did more after his injury than before, probably because of his injury. This guy was paralyzed. This is John Cardiel. He is, from my point of view, he defines skateboarding to me. Not only was he at the top, out of some freak accident, he ends up paralyzed, and week after week after week after month, he stares at his big toe, willing it to move. Nothing. Until one day he thought it moved just a little bit. I think the words were, "It's on." Today, he's skating again. He has vestiges of it, but he's riding his fixed gear bike going, he is everything we want to be. He's a skateboarder. So what am I saying? We all have attributes, gears. All of us have attributes, whatever, balance, courage, skills. The most talented guy, one of the most talented guys I see in that list, he tells me that the most gifted guy he's ever seen with all the gears works at a gas station somewhere in rural wherever. Same with me. For 30 years, I travel around the world and I meet thousands of kids. And they have everything it takes in terms of the gearing. They have it. They have stuff I don't have sometimes. I see it. I know it. It's one thing I do know. But the one thing that they don't have to make those things happen, to be amongst them, is the engine behind the gears. And that, for all of us, is a little different. What drives us all is a little bit different. But the one thing, just like the sort of dust that gets ingrained in the executive motor functions, the things that shape and give us dialects, just like them, this act of getting up again, that's what shapes and forms the engine. So, look, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I get that. I'm just putting faces to it from our community. Perhaps it will translate into what you do in your communities. Thank you for listening to me.